Hello and welcome to the Pages of Light podcast, your destination for discussions of popular fantasy and science fiction novels from a Christian worldview. My name is Tyler, aka Varum, and with me, as always, is Gabriel, aka the Quarantine Quartermaster. Welcome back to the podcast. It's always good to be back here. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good today. We are entering October. We're in October and getting ready for the spookiest time of year. I enjoy some ghost stories, so I've been indulging in some podcasts and stuff. So I'm excited to record our podcast today. So yeah, I'm ready to go.
Cool, yeah. Well, today we're going to be recording part 1 of the Crimson Campaign, which is book 2 of the Powder Mage Trilogy by Brian McClellan. If you want to hear our thoughts on book 1, which was called Promise of Blood, correct? Yes? Promise of Blood.
Yes.
I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to check that out. We did 2 episodes on that book as well. If you want to check out Pages of Light, you can head over to our website, pagesoflight.com, and you can find us on all of the social media type things. So just search for our name and you'll probably find us. So even though this is October, this isn't really a spooky book, a scary book. Maybe we should have thought of that, doing like we should have done Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Maybe we'll do that at some point. That's a pretty short book. Could do like a one-off potentially on that. Have you ever read Frankenstein?
Back in the day.
I
read it. Yeah. It's been a long time. I think I read it like in high school times, which was long ago now.
Yeah, I know I had to read it for college in my literature class. But I think that was the first time and only time I've read it. But I should do a reread at some point, because it's apparently the first science fiction novel, considered one of the first science fiction novels.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because it's and mad scientist like has a creation and it goes awry and yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it was published in like the 1800s, I think.
Yeah, early 1800s, I think, or maybe mid 1800s. I'm a little fuzzy on it. But yeah, around then. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about Crimson Campaign, and we're going to be doing chapters 1 through 21. And so that's a little bit of a change, where we're just going to be reading half the book and then talking about that half, and then reading the second half of the book and talking about the second half in each of the 2 episodes that we do on a book. If a book's really, really long, we might break it up and do 3 episodes. So we'll just have to depend on, because if like a book's like 1,000 pages, that's a lot to split into, because that's like, if you split it in half, that's 500. Some books aren't even 500 pages long, so there could be a lot to talk about. So that's going to be the plan.
You're thinking of Wheel of Time.
Wheel of Time. Or if we ever get to do those books right up there that you can't really see in the screen. Why am I blanking? The Stormlight Archive, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because I haven't read those yet at all. So
yeah, but those
I have my friend who told me about the medals. You gotta get the medals to do the powers.
That's Mistborn, so that's a different series.
Mistborn. Oh, okay. Yes.
So I'm actually in the middle of a reread of that series. I'm on book 2 right now. Loving it, as always. Mistborn is great.
Nice.
But yeah, so we're going to be doing Crimson Campaign, and we're going to kick off with our favorite quote. So my favorite quote that I have this time it's on page 108, and it just says, "These things are rarely so simple as with or against." And I can't remember the specific context that this was in, but I think it's Taniel talking to somebody's trying to recruit him, I believe, to be like a political person.
Tumbler.
Yeah, Ricard Tumbler is trying to basically recruit him to like be part of his campaign, because he's trying to be, what do they call it, the president, or not sure what they specifically call it, what he's running for.
Yeah, for Adro, he's going to be the first, maybe like prime minister or something. And he wants to go down in the history books as the first, I'm going to say, prime minister of Adro, because they had the monarchy, and book 1, Promise of Blood, is when Tamas chops the head off of Manhooch and moves them into the new age of democracy, and they're in this political turmoil now, and they're trying to figure out where the power lies, and they're having elected officials for the first time.
Yeah. Yes, that is part of the story, but that's actually, I was mistaken. That's not where the quote is from. I just looked up my note here. It's when Adamat is talking to the eunuch. And I think he's trying to find out information about Lord Vetus, and something about Adamat says something about, like, the eunuch is basically implying that he's either with or against you, and yeah, that's kind of the context. But
so why did you choose the quote?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I like that quote just because that is definitely a true statement that things are not as simple as being with or against typically. And sometimes I think we can get into binary thinking where if you're not, it's like that quote from Star Wars and Revenge of the Sith, whenever towards the very end, if you haven't seen Revenge of the Sith, spoilers, but Anakin sees Obi-Wan Kenobi and he says, if you're not with me, then you're against me. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi says, only a Sith deals in absolutes. So it's just like the idea that if you're like, it's like a simplistic way of thinking, and only people who are like evil think in those kind of simplistic terms, because they think if you're not with them, then you're against them. And yeah, I just think it's good to have like a more of an open mind and try to see things from other people's perspective, even if you might not disagree. If you disagree with what they're saying, but like maybe try to see their point of view and where they're coming from, you can have more of a discussion, and maybe you can sway their opinion, or they might sway your opinion. But yeah, I think if we just deal in the kind of the absolutes, we build these little tribes, and it's like we think this, and then we think this, and then we're just gonna fight each other because we have different opinions. And I think that doesn't really help anybody. Doesn't get us anywhere. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on just that quote in general?
Well, since I don't have a quote, I will build on your idea of your quote. Two things come to mind. So we specifically have asked our daughter not to speak in absolutes. And she does it purposefully because she's 3.5 years old and she's rebellious. So when she says the word always or never, we try to coach her away from that and just say we don't use those words, because and the biblical part of that is let your yes mean yes and let your no mean no. Because if you say like I will never do something, and especially as a kid, like you could say that and like think that's going to be true, but like as an adult and you've like gone through life changes and like I'll never do such and such a thing, and then like life happens and then you're like find yourself doing that, like okay, all right, so maybe I shouldn't do that. And like I try to balance my language so that I don't use absolutes like that, and I think that it's important to be like it's like driven up the need for qualifiers, like I will not do this thing when XYZ. And an example, I don't know, I've listened back to our podcast, and I hate when I give like generic examples. I need to be more concrete with my examples, and I'm just like it's eluding me right now of like a specific example of like I just don't like saying I'll never I'll never go to this person's house or something like that. Like I'll never we always go out to eat on a Friday. These are generic examples, but just saying that it's going to become untrue at some point. Like, not all the time, but
Yeah.
and I think it's important for you to kind of shape your words around like the current situation, and not to speak in absolutes, because when you speak in absolutes, like, a lot of times you end up being a liar, which is not what God wants. So I've learned to speak with like conditional statements and stuff. So, so those were my two thoughts. One, we try and coach our daughter away from using those words. And the second is, in the Bible, it says, let your yes mean yes and let your no mean no. And so trying to speak the truth.
Yeah.
So,
and
good quote.
Yeah. And sometimes we like say things like never and always more, not out of like, because that's a true statement, but it's more of like for dramatic effect. You're like trying to really make your point of like how crazy something is, or, you know, how much you really believe in something, but it's not like an actual true statement to say that you would always do something or never do something else. So it's usually like you're using it for dramatic effect and not because of it's actually a true statement.
That's very true. And now, like, I kind of remember a little bit from our re-engage group where, you know, it's coaching people how to be like a better couple biblically. And when you use that, like, when you use it against your spouse, like, it's not leading anywhere good. Like,
right, yes.
You are always in front of the trash can when I need to use the trash can. There's a concrete example. Sometimes I feel that way. Like my wife is standing like right where I need to go in the kitchen. Like, you're always in my way. And if you say that, it not only hurts your spouse, but then it also proves that you are not being truthful. Like, people get frustrated in the moment and they're like, you are always yelling at me. And it's like, like, we're not yelling all the time. Like, it's just, like, imagine if someone always yelled at you. How awkward of a relationship would that be if someone was literally always yelling at you?
I don't think you'd have a relationship for very long if that was the case.
Right? So, you know, it's just unfair. And, like, that's kind of another basis is, like, in our marriage, in the re-engage curriculum, they teach you, like, to steer clear of that. So you're always doing this to me. You're always coming home late, you know, like some like statements like that are just like poison in a relationship. So steer clear, friends. Steer clear.
Yes. But one other thing about that quote is it says things are rarely so simple. So that doesn't mean that there's never a time where there is like a complete binary. Like, there's some things especially if you have like a biblical mindset where, you know, the Bible says this and our culture says X. I mean, you know, sometimes there's not really a lot of wiggle room. I mean, you can have discussions about some of the minutia about what that means and how you live it out or whatever. But sometimes there is a time to just make a stand and say, I'm on this side of the fence and you can be on that side of the fence, but I'm not going to like engage in a discussion with you because, you know, I'm like, it's not going to be a productive discussion because I've already made up my mind on where I stand on a particular issue. So just to
I will never use a Ouija board.
That's a time
because
where
in the Bible,
say, right?
Yeah, that's an absolute for me. Like, I'm not going to commune with the dead because they tell us to avoid that. And as I've said previously, I've heard too many stories about attachments and negative energies coming through that, and it's opening your soul. Never do that. And I'm also training my daughter to do that, because even in kids movies, like with like all this Halloween theme, it's like, oh, we'll just bust out the Ouija board. And I'm like, no, stop saying that. We are not going to do that. That is not, it's not safe.
Yes. Yeah. But I guess all that to say is sometimes there are times where there is a binary, but a lot of times there are times where you can have a discussion and be open-minded. So just, you know, maybe think about the situation and if that is a time to be in a binary situation, or if it's a time to have a discussion about, you know, the minutia of a particular situation. So it's a good chance to show some wisdom. Cool. All right. Now that our favorite quote is over.
Jump in.
Yeah, we're going to jump in. So we're going to kick off with the first few chapters. So basically chapters 1, 2, and 3 just start off with reorienting us with where each of our main characters are. So chapter 1 we have Adamat, chapter 2 is Tamas, and then chapter 3 is Taniel. And so basically chapter 1 we have Adamat. Basically at the end of book 1, I think his family got kidnapped by Lord Vetus and was being held hostage. And so at the beginning of this book, we have Adamat. Basically, he is outside. Is it his own house? I think he's outside his own house. And there's some like goons in there that are keeping some of his family hostage. And he's got some people that Tamas had given him, some soldiers to help him get his family back. And so they surround the house and they go in and they take out some of the goons, and he gets some of his family back, but he finds out that his wife Faye and his son Joseph were taken somewhere else. And so that's basically going to be his plot through this first half of the book, is figuring out where his wife and son are being held and how is he going to get them back. And so that's basically what's going to be happening with Adamat's story. Any thoughts on Adamat's story as we have a cat walking in? Actually, they probably couldn't see that. They probably can't see that on the podcast screen.
Oh, okay.
Because I think your screen gets cut off on the side. It's all good.
Yeah. Serafina was just coming to say hello.
Yes.
She's all right. Just as a father, like,
yeah,
I see my daughter and I'm just like, I don't want anything bad to happen to her. And then to have your whole family held hostage, like, I am so glad we live in America where, like, this is not a reality for 99% of people. Like, there are some extreme cases where things like this happen. But, like, we don't live in a society where this is, like, commonplace. And it's probably not even commonplace in Adapest, in this story. But, oh, man, to have your family taken away from you and, like, held hostage and, like, the threat of death, it's just, like...
Yeah.
That makes a desperate man. Adamat is he wants his family back. And,
yeah.
And I just think about how, like... much of a team my wife and I are, and just like the other when you become married you become one flesh, and like it makes you a team, and to have that like deprived from you, it's just an awful thought. So so never want to be in Adamat's shoes in this situation.
Yeah, you actually mentioned something that was another quote that I really enjoyed, and it's actually from the same conversation and chapter as the quote I already mentioned. And it's Adamat talking to the eunuch, and he says, "Family, there's nothing that will make a man more desperate and more capable of violence than endangering his family." Which I think is definitely true. Like, if there's ever going to be a time where I'm going to be violent, it's going to be when somebody threatens my wife or my kids, I would think. There wouldn't be too many other situations where I'd want to get into an altercation with somebody. Of course, you'd want to avoid violence at all costs, because, violence is not the way you should be resolving your conflicts. But if
violence begets violence.
Yeah. But that just speaks to like how important family is for Adamat in this case, and men and husbands in general.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And then in chapter 2 we have Tamas. So Tamas is basically at the end of book 1 there was the Kez army is amassing, and in this book they're starting to march to the southern border of Adapest, or Adapest, however you pronounced it.
Adapest, yep.
As always, we defer to Gabe for the pronunciation, as he is the audiobook listener.
Yep, I do get the benefit of listening to professional narrators.
But yeah, so basically he is down on the southern border, and he is,
you know,
planning the defense of the, I forget. Budville. Okay, so that's the town that they're in, which is basically the very end of the very southern border. And there's a wall there and gate and stuff. And so he's planning the defense of the city, or the country, essentially. There wasn't too much else that happened in that chapter, basically just setting up what's going on. And then chapter 3, we have Taniel. And so at the end of book 1, Taniel had shot Kresimir through the eye and thinks that he kills him. And after this, there's some, I can't remember the specifics of the end of the book, but there's some explosion or something collapsed or something like that, and Capol pulls him out and saves him. But he's in a coma. And at the beginning of this book, he wakes up from his coma, and essentially he's in like this really deep depression, and he's like drowning himself in drugs, and he's trying to forget what happened. And yeah,
he's at the Mala Den.
Yeah, he's at the Mala Den, and he's just like in a bad way.
Which to like in our world, it would be like, I feel like it would be like an opium den.
Right. Yeah.
Like that would be the equivalent of what it would be like here.
Yeah.
Just like this like the drug that you take, it's like super lethargic and like you don't want to move for hours at a time.
Yeah, and
never
because
experienced opium.
Thanks for clarifying that. What was I gonna say? So because he's a powder mage, though, like he has like a general, like he's more, I guess, immune to the effects of the mala, and so he's able to. They comment later in the book like, "You've taken like so much of that stuff. I should have killed you like numerous times," but he's still kicking along, and that's just because he's a powerful powder mage, and he has some kind of superhuman abilities to resist the effects. There's one point where he's like, I told you to give me this much, and you only gave me this much. And he's like complaining that he wasn't given enough mala, and the guy's like, you smoked enough mala to like kill 5 people or something like that. And that's when he's like, oh, maybe I have a problem here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a bad situation. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just like Adamat's, and this is coming later, but like when Adamat is talking to Rickard Tumbler, when Rickard Tumbler is asking him.
You mean Taniel?
No, when Rickard Tumbler is talking to Adamat about finding Taniel.
Oh, right.
And Adamat says, there's 2 places soldiers go after war. They either go for vice or they go home. And he says that Taniel is a career soldier, so I think vice. And I just think that's an interesting observation on, like, that could be maybe one of the quotes, but like, yeah, like I feel like that's true. I don't know how much legitimacy that there is behind that statement, but I feel like it's pretty true. Like, like after war, you want to just like totally forget yourself in this Maladen, or you want to go home and be with your family. So yeah, that's my thought, is that like I feel there's legitimacy behind that statement.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I've heard stories of people coming home from war, especially after World War II, where they had a lot of people get put on morphine for pain, and they got addicted to the morphine, and then whenever they got back home, they still had like addiction problems with that throughout their life. Yeah, so there is some truth to that kind of a story. Yeah, so that's where Taniel is basically starting off on our story. And then chapter 4, we kind of actually have, which I don't know if you'd consider her a main character. She's kind of like a side character, but she has an interesting story, and that's Nyla, who was the, I don't know what your title would be. She was something like a servant or a maid or something like that.
She was the laundress.
The laundress, right. And she was the laundress for one of the lords before Tamas
Duke Elderman I think is the name.
Eldaments, yeah. Eldaments, Lord Eldaments. Yeah, that was his name. But now she's basically with Lord Vetus, and because she basically keeps watch over the Lord Eldaments' son named Jacob. And so Lord Vetus has Jacob, and so because he has Jacob, that he also has Nyla, because Nyla wants to look after the boy and keep him safe. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so we just get some interesting stories with her and her kind of dealing with Lord Vetus. And I liked her.
Yeah, she's like our window into Lord Vetus's life and what he's doing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I liked her bits because we got to see kind of what Lord Vetus was like, and how he's kind of operating, which was cool. And then we also get to meet, well, not meet, but we get more information about Adamat's wife, Faye, because they kind of talk a little bit and get to work together in some instances. So, yeah, so I don't know that I'd consider her a main character, but she is a cool side character that we get some scenes with throughout the story.
So I was thinking maybe we could just talk through the different storylines of our main characters and kind of because in my brain that's where that's kind of how the story flows to me.
Yeah, because they're mostly independent storylines, except for a little bit of Adamat and Taniel intertwining a little bit. For the most part, they're basically individual storylines for the first half of the book. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Who do you think we should start with?
I think we should start with Adamat. I think Adamat might be my favorite character.
You want to take this? You want to talk about it?
No, you can take it, but I just think I like the inspector kind of character. I like the research, the investigation. I liked it in the first book when he went to the libraries and tried to find I think it was something about Kresimmir's returning or whatever, something where the books were getting burnt out or pages were being torn out, and
Kresimmir's promise, I think, is what he was investigating.
Right.
Yeah. So as Adamat is left in the first book, his family's captured. So Tamas kind of empowers him by giving him a troop of soldiers. Yeah. So Adamat is able to reclaim his family, but his wife Faye and Joseph, as you said, have been taken to another location. So he is in search of Lord Vetus. But before that, he's hired to figure out where Taniel is, and he finds out that, and we talked about the quote where soldiers go for home or vice. So he goes to the girlish quarter and finds Taniel in a stupor in the 6th Malad den that he checks. And Rickard Tumbler says, you just lucked out. And Adamat's saying to himself, well, I did luck out, but I'm not telling a client that. So, and then Adamat is avidly hunting for Lord Vetus. And so he finds his way into a tailor's shop that does super high-end clothes, and he sees a coat that Lord Vetus, and remember, Adamat is a knacked, and so he has a special skill that he never forgets anything, and that's his knack. And so he sees this jacket, and he sees that it's been damaged, and he's maybe this is actually Lord Vetus's jacket. So he stakes it out, and he's looking, and then a few days later, Nyla shows up, but he doesn't know who Nyla is, and she walks in and she gets the jacket, and he's just walking and he's trailing her, and he finds his way to Lord Vetus's house, which is just in the middle of this upper crust neighborhood, and it doesn't look like any hideout or anything special, and he gets mugged, but he actually ends up getting a pistol to the face, and he gets knocked out. And he wakes up in bondage in some basement, and he's am I gonna die down here? And so he's actually been captured by the proprietor. And so we haven't talked about the proprietor yet. The proprietor is the overlord of all the scum in Adro, and it's the big crime boss, and has a lot of power and influence, and the proprietor is represented by the eunuch. So everyone knows who the eunuch is, and that the eunuch represents the proprietor. And we learned that the eunuch has actually killed a privilege, and there's not a lot of details on that, but that was something that was revealed about the eunuch that was pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. And then there's a conversation, and Adamat is like dismissed from the household, and he's like, "Why was I allowed to leave freely?" So he does his investigation. He takes these hairs from the carpet, and he goes to one of Faye's friends. She's like, "I can know where this is from by next week." So Adamat comes back and talks to her, and she writes down an address, and Adamat hails a cab, and he's like, "I know this address." And so he recruits Sue Smith, who has been shot and stabbed. And Rickard Tumbler has paid for another Nact to heal Sue Smith, and he's like healed up. Sue Smith is like superhuman. I love him. He's the man of few words, and he'll just like bust heads when he needs to.
He's the muscle.
Yeah, he's Adamat's muscle. So Adamat shows up on the Reeve, Andros the Reeve's doorstep, and Andros is like, "What are you doing?" And Adamat has him at gunpoint, and then he just drops into this like calculating like visage, and Adamat has a thrill run through him when the Reeve says, "I am the proprietor," essentially. And he's like, "I figured it out." And so no one in all of the 9, like only like 4 people know who he is. And then they work out a deal where Adamat gets money because he's figured out where Lord Vetus is. He knows like his numbers. There's like, I don't know, like 30.
It was like 30 but he has a privilege. That's the problem. And so he, even if he had a bunch of soldiers, the privilege is going to be a big problem because they could just wipe out a ton of people. So, and there's basically only one privileged in the city that he could recruit, and it's privileged Borobudur.
Mm-hmm. Good old Bo.
Good old Bo.
And he's like imprisoned by Tamas's men. And he still has the Geist on him, which is compelling him to kill the people who have killed the crown. And
Manhooch.
Manhooch. And Adamat goes and talks to Bo's jailers, and they're like 75,000 crowner, and you can have him. And so Adamat gets the money from the proprietor and starts.
Well, they weren't originally going to do it, even though they were like, even though he was like, "I'll give you money," they were like, "No, we're supposed to be here. That's what our orders are." And he like convinces them because he's like, "You're not doing anything here. There's a war going on. You'd be better off helping down there." And then that makes them be like, "Okay, fine. If you give us this much money, we'll bounce."
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so he gets Bo out, and Bo's like, "I need 24 hours before I can help you do whatever you need to do." Mm-hmm. And then Adamat's like, "I'm not letting you out of my sight." And Bo, first stop he goes to a hideout he has. He gets his privileged gloves back so he can work the else and do magic. And he gets out probably 1,000,000 crowner and gives Adamat like 100,000 crowner back to pay for his release. And then and Bo's going all over town. He's got like a cab. He's driving all over the place. And the 4th time he's driving all over the place, he Adamat follows him, watches him bribe a guy to come talk to him in the alleyway, and then Bo just snaps his fingers, and this guy's head twists around like the Exorcist, and he drops dead on the spot. And Adamat's just like, like he just watched that happen. And then they both get back in the car, and Bo says, "Will you hold on to this for me?" And it's the Geist. He has broken the Geist because he has gone through and killed specifically the executioner who killed Manhooch.
Yep.
And he was like, I really didn't know if this was gonna work, so I just started killing people to see if it would work. But he did kill them, and the Geist was released, so he no longer is compelled to kill Tamas.
Yep.
Who, it was Tamas's plan, but it wasn't done by Tamas's hand, and I think that's the key to breaking it. And so now, Bo is ready to go with Adamat, and they are ready to siege Lord Vetus's stronghold, and that's kind of where we end up in this storyline.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts on Adamat?
It's a good cliffhanger.
And his storyline.
It's a good cliffhanger to stop. So, looking forward to seeing what happens next in that. Yeah, I mean, I like Adamat as a character and Privilege Bo. They're both cool characters. And I think they both kind of want to do the right thing, although they do those things in maybe questionable means. But
definitely not Christian way.
Definitely not. For the Geist, I wonder if it was is it the multiple killings, or was it that one killing that did it, the last one? Or was it the stacking effect of all the different ones? He had to kill all of the people, or if it was just the one person, the executioner, that was holding him to the Geist. Probably we won't know, but...
Yeah, because I feel if it was the executioner who released the demon's carbuncle, which held the Geist or whatever, maybe it was just the executioner because he physically removed the head of Manhooch. Right. Have to ask Brian McClellan, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I like Adamat versus Lord Vetus, because Lord Vetus is kind of he's an interesting villain because we don't really know a lot about him. We get a few things through Nyla's interaction with him, but we don't know where he came from, what a lot of his motivations are. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing more about him and what he's trying to accomplish. There's probably something in Nyla's chapters that mention what he's trying to accomplish, but that I'm blanking on. I don't know if you remember anything specific, but
yeah. So we do get some reveals about Lord Vetus. So Rickard Tumbler has hired a person to work for him by the name of Fell, and this is in the Adamat storyline. And Fell is his assistant, and we learn that he is paid 10 million crowner to have her on his staff, and she attended this secret
elite school type thing. Yes, I do remember that.
Of Shadow. Yeah, the that's called the Fontaine Academy, I think. And when I hear the name Fontaine, I think of BioShock. I think the third one maybe has a fontaine in it. And it's basically super school. She's I've been in every single class, mathematics, statistics, human behavior. I've been trained in I'm proficient with every single weapon under the sun, and they basically go there for 30 years and they do 18-hour days nonstop and just become a machine. And Lord Vetus has undergone this same training, and that's kind of the big reveal about where he his kind of origin. So very brain is working high functioning, and then also physically we learn that Fell, and we'll get into this, she holds her own against a warden. They this is a highly skilled, highly trained group of people. Only 1 out of 1,000 actually graduate from the Fontaine Academy.
Yep. But I think I remember them saying that she didn't complete it. Like she only did 10 years or 15 years or something like that. Like she's half done. So it cost Ricard like half of what it would have normally cost to get someone from the academy. Yeah, that was just a tidbit I remember. There's like, whenever you read these epic fantasy books, there's always like those things that just like, until somebody mentions like one word like Fontaine Academy, and then it's like, oh yeah, all those things come back into my head. Like, there's so many things to parcel out in your head, and if you're reading multiple books, they start to all get like, something has to like leave your mind to make room for the other things that you're putting into it. Yeah,
that is called. There's actually a name for that, which I know from when I was teaching psychology, and it's called tip of the tongue phenomenon. Knowing something exists in your long-term memory, but lacking the proper retrieval cue. So I gave you the retrieval cue. I said Fontaine Academy, and then boom, all this information comes out of your brain. You're like, okay, I got it. But yeah, that's the thing with like research, people who are researchers, or like us who people like read a lot of books.
Right.
Your brain purges itself, and like you become a temporary expert, and you're like awesome on it, and then like a few months go by, and you're like, what was that about?
Yeah. Maybe we need to like read and then immediately after do the podcast, because I feel like the longer we wait to do a podcast, like the more of that purging starts to happen. So
for sure.
Yeah. So thank you for being
the retrieval cue that you needed.
That's right. Thank you very much. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with Adamat's storyline there, and I wonder if he's going to get his family back at the end of this book, or if there's going to be something where he doesn't get. Maybe he gets one of them back and one of them dies. That could be very fitting. Maybe his wife has to sacrifice herself to save her son Joseph. Yeah, I don't know. I won't ask you because you've read the whole book, so I think
I know the answer to that question.
You know where the story ends, but
I know the answer to that question. I'm not going to say anything.
Well, thank you. Leave your thoughts of what's going to happen in the comments below if you have not finished the book.
Yeah, and
no spoilers.
No spoilers. Sorry, I was going to say. I told Tyler before we started the podcast that like I remember like the end, like some of the ending, but I totally forget like the journey. And again, it's like the tip of the tongue phenomenon. Like if you were to prompt me with the right retrieval cues, I could pull that information out of my brain. But right now it's just kind of like I know where the story ends and I kind of know the ending, but like I totally forget the path to get there.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting like idea that you mentioned with those retrieval cues, like thinking about like how you could maybe take notes on books more effectively is, finding specific words that would help you remember more pieces of the story. Yeah, so I've been slowly trying to like work out like a better note-taking system or a better way to like remember and digest fantasy books and pull important things out of them that are applicable to life or whatever. So yeah, thank you for some more insight and knowledge.
Yeah, I just think that I taught AP psychology for 4 years, and just having that like teaching kids about like the 7 sins of memory and like using heuristics to remember more things, or like just learning those concepts, and then over time, like the best way to learn something is to teach it, because when you are teaching to kids or like anyone, they will ask you questions, and it will push you into like, how well do I actually know this? And when you get questioned for 4 years about the same things, like those are some things in my mind that are not going anywhere. I know those things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure in any job that you work, you have a lot of times the same things come up over and over and over again. So that's how you become an expert in your field, because you're always talking about the same things or the same way things are going, or whatever. So yeah, memory is an interesting thing.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that's Adamat's story basically. So let's move to Tamas. Tamas doesn't really have a whole lot of things like big plot things that are happening. He's mainly, so basically what happens with Tamas is he's on the southern border. He's fighting the Kez, or like planning. He's basically waiting for their big invasion and planning how to repulse it. He doesn't. It's going to be basically very hard to do it because their numbers are so crazy, and so he's trying to figure out the best strategy to do it. And some people come to him, and there's basically this like tunnel that they found that will lead them out behind the enemy encampment. And so he comes up with this plan where he's going to take basically his best soldiers that he has, and he's going to take them through this tunnel, and he's going to set them up, and they're going to basically wait for their army to attack the gates. And then once that happens, they're going to attack and then sandwich them and get them in some kind of an ambush. Because that's going to be the only way that he can win, because of their overwhelming numbers. He has to get them in some kind of disadvantageous situation so he can win. And through a series of unfortunate events, I think it's like the Black Wardens, essentially, is they just like basically just run up and just like basically lay waste to their army. And at this point, I don't think they had known that the Black Wardens existed, so they didn't know that.
Correct.
They had that like card in their hand, and so that like basically threw their plan completely out of the window. And Tamas has to make a decision. Does he send the army to attack anyway, knowing probably that they'll lose because the gates have been lost, so there's no longer anywhere. The ambush basically isn't going to work because there's nothing holding them back at the gates anymore. Or is he going to basically just retreat and try to run away? And he decides to I wouldn't say run away. Tamas doesn't run away. He's making a strategic retreat to like plan and think of a better strategy, or he's trying to get back to Adapist another way.
Yeah, I think the city that they're going for is called Alvation. And they're like, sir,
right,
this is like 1 month of hard marching.
Yeah.
And then they're in the situation where like all the soldiers had like their ration packs for like a week.
Yeah.
Or like 2 or 3 days, and then they like have to hike a month through enemy territory.
Yeah. And
which is such a great setup, by the way. Like,
yeah,
abandoned abandoned in like enemy territory. But like you have a really strong fighting crew, you're just abandoned without food or anything.
Yeah. Well, the problem with, even though you have a really good, like, even though they're your best soldiers, the best soldiers can only do so well whenever they're starving and tired and being like, they're marching basically nonstop to get as far away as they can, because the Kez figured out where they were, or figured out that they have run away or retreating, and they're sending out the cavalry to track them down. So, and they don't have a ton of cavalry, so they have a lot of just foot soldiers, so they can't keep the same pace as the cavalry would, so they're also at a disadvantage there. And so they're making for the Fingers of Kresimir, which are these like little kind of rivers that run through the forest. And they're trying to come up with this plan, and they're trying to get to this this larger river, I think. Then there's a bridge there, and I think the original plan is they're going to get to the bridge, and then they're going to take out the bridge, so that way the cavalry has to go around, so that buys them more time. But Tamas has this, and we don't see we don't see his full plan, because that's where we stopped reading at chapter 21. But he tells this small group of people to ride ahead and to take out the bridge beforehand, before they get there. And so he's telling the mass of soldiers that we're going to get to this place, we're going to cross the bridge, and then we're going to take the bridge out, and then that'll buy us some time or whatever. So the soldiers are all like, yes, we're going to get to the bridge, and then that's going to be our saving grace where we can get a little bit of a reprieve. But he basically does something opposite, and I'm blanking on his like second in command. What's the second in command?
Gavril.
Yeah, Gavril's like, I'm going to do it, but if it doesn't work, then I'm going to curse you, essentially.
Yeah.
And he's also having a potential problem with people basically saying what Tamas did and not keeping it a secret. So there's a lot of stuff with that where you can only push an army so far. So dealing with some infighting and personnel problems, as we'll talk about in a second with Valora. But so that's basically Tamas' story, is trekking through the woods, trying to buy time. They kill a bunch of their horses for food. So, yeah. What are your thoughts on Tamas's kind of story? There's not a lot that happens. It's just,
Yeah,
it's like a lot of
some
setup.
Stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to go through, like, first of all, like, I love Tamas. Like, he is such a good character. He is, like, his heart is in the right place. Like, in the beginning of the march, he was like, I would rather be walking with the soldiers. Me personally,
Right.
if I have a horse, I'm going to ride the horse, like, hands down. Like,
Yeah.
that just makes my life easier. But
Yep.
Tamas is like the person, like, if I could, like, he was saying how in the first book he has a golden star. Was it a golden star or a lead star?
Yeah, something they put
gold.
in gold, because that was what kept him from using his powder.
Yeah, and his sorcery. So he had that inserted into his knee, and he was healed by Maharli. But it didn't fully take, and he still has like pain in his knee, so he decided to ride his horse. But I just love that, in the first book, he loves his dogs, Pitlor and the other one, and then like here, he's like, I want to walk with the men, and then he does this big speech to all the men, but he also has like his heart is in the right space, but he is deceptive in the fact that he sends Gavril ahead, to destroy the bridge. So it looks like to his army that they have no choice to do this, when really it was a contrived plan by Tamas.
Right.
Which is not really like a Christian thing to do, but like, again... Yeah. Like, I think that's interesting that, like, his end result is something that he decided and that he made. And he's kind of forcing his troops into the situation by a situation he's, like, handcrafted. So he is, like, being deceptive and...
Yeah.
But, like, that he wants to do that for the success of his army. Yeah. And I think the difference between Christianity and like living in the world is like, we can admire him as being like a strong character, but he's not a good Christian leader because he's being deceptive. And I think that God doesn't want you to be deceptive in that way. Like, there are things that I feel, I think we've talked about this before with truth, that like you can conceal things without, giving the whole truth. And I think that's allowable within God's law. He's like actively like acting against, he's not being straightforward with his soldiers. He's like, he's like actively like creating his own scenario. And then we get into the whole Olam and Valora situation. So Tamas is like going out to bathe in the river, and he happens upon Vlora and Olam, and they are in a situation where they're about to be intimate, and he's embarrassed, they're embarrassed, everyone's embarrassed, and then he pulls Olam aside later, and
you can't be doing that.
Yeah, he says that to Olam, and Olam's like, well, if you hadn't have showed up, I would have like been doing a lot better. and Tamas was like, he's like, I can't believe he said that to me. And then he's like, I won't have fraternization between my soldiers, and she's a powder mage, and you're a captain, and no fraternization. And then he talks to Laura, and Vlora gives it to him both barrels. Yeah, and she's just like saying
she does not care anymore.
Yeah, she does not care, and she's just like saying how she regrets the decision to sleep with this guy, which was basically, it seemed like a ploy against like Tamas or Taniel. Like he was in that situation, and then and then she does this really cheeky thing where like Olam is like riding through the lines of people on his horse and like telling, and then she like
just grabs
pulls him off into the bushes to do who knows what. Yeah, but we know, we all know.
We know. Yeah,
and Tamas is like fighting himself. He's like raging. He's like, I can't believe she's doing that. And then he's like, I can't do anything. He just like walks away.
Yeah, he's in Tamas is in like a conundrum because he can't, like, what's he gonna do? Is he just gonna like off his officers? Like he has limited resources. He has limited officers. Like he can't just get rid of them, and so he kind of has to just deal with them.
Do I want to do a public beating right before I need my troops to like
right, exactly.
like perform at their best? So his hands are tied, and if he was like in Adamat with his army, like that would have gone down differently. But he's in a desperate situation, so he understands that for morale purposes, there's absolutely nothing he can do.
Right.
So that was like I enjoyed that part of it, and just hearing how he's like, they're at half rations, and he's like, cut them again. Like, we need to go down to quarter rations, and then like keep marching and just staying barely ahead of like the incoming. I think they call them dragoons or the horseback people. Yeah. And now Tamas is hatching a plan. He's like, I want Bayon Jaipali, who he does have a conversation with, like. He's hunting Tamas, and he's saying like, we're gonna catch you, and Tamas is like, well, good luck, because I'm gonna keep going. And now he's hatching a plan with his engineers, and they're at the river, and he's like, I want to have a crossing, and then he's going to invite an attack, and we don't exactly know what the plan is.
Yep.
And that's where we leave off this storyline, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting, just the whole situation with Vlora and his officers, and just like the idea of like your moral principles, and whenever you're pushed to the limits of your like physical strength, mental strength, emotional strength, like will you compromise on your values, on your morals? And in this situation we see people basically just, they're not respecting authority, they're basically just saying whatever they want because they know they can get away with it. And I mean, I guess that's freeing in a way, like you can say things that you wouldn't otherwise say, but I do think there's some element of like you're compromising on what you would, on your values, just because you are in a position where you're like it's allowable, or like you're not going to have repercussions for what you're doing. And I just think that's like an important thing for trying to bring in some kind of a Christian perspective to this storyline of like, whenever you're pushed to the limits, whenever you're in difficult conversations or in a situation where maybe you can get away with something and maybe nobody will know or whatever, like, are you going to compromise your values? Are you going to do something that you know is not right just because you can get away with it? Or are you going to, stand up for what you believe in and do the right thing even when nobody is looking and whenever you're in secret? I don't remember the specific passage, like something about like God sees what is done in secret, acknowledges it, or something like that along those lines. That's a massive paraphrase of I don't even remember where that is in the Bible, but
sure. Yeah. And yeah, the word is integrity. Like,
right.
Are you going to have integrity, like, when no one's looking? Because God always sees, and God knows your heart and what's in it, and He knows you better than you know yourself. So, yeah. But I think that's an appropriate quote, and I think it's very human to give in to the temptations, and like especially like Tamas's army, who is like on quarter ration, like they're slaughtering the horses for meat, like
right.
They're in a desperate situation, and I feel like if I'm that run down, I am not
right.
looking to follow orders or anything. Like, I'm hungry, I'm tired.
Yep.
Like, I get hungry and tired after like a 12-hour day. Like, I can't even imagine what it would be like to march nonstop for weeks at a time on like
right.
no food. Like, I would be dead at the end of the call. It'd be like Gabe's gonna die. We'll see him later.
Yeah. Yeah. But just thinking of like, people in wartime situations, like prisoners of war, like I've heard stories of people like, they get tortured for hours on end. They're asked to betray their faith, their country, all these different things. And the thing that gets people through those situations without breaking is like their bedrock foundational principles that were instilled into them whenever they were young. Bible verses that they memorized, like the military handbook, the code of conduct, how you're supposed to act whenever you're in these situations. Like, those are the things that they remember and they can memorize and they can recite in their head. And then, having people around you, like those other people that are in the same situation as you, to speak into you and just to help you whenever you're down, and then you can help them whenever they're down. So a sense of Christian community as well, to keep people, on the straight and narrow and looking towards, how we should be acting and not what we can get away with, essentially. So, yeah.
Yeah, I live in fear of the term forced march.
Forced march.
Like, that's, yeah, like if, our country was ever invaded and like we were captured and like we had to go on a forced march somewhere, like for just miles and miles, and if you fall behind, like they would just shoot you and keep walking. Like, like that's a fear for me. I would never want to be in a forced march situation. And fortunately, we live in America where we're surrounded like on either side by oceans, and so that gives us a really strong fortified position. But
yeah,
I mean, I feel like World War III is going to happen.
Yeah, probably will at some point.
I really hope that
you're not around. You're not around.
Yeah, but then like my daughter, like
yeah, that's right.
I just hope it's like it's just so tough. There's so much. Things are less sure. Like after the pandemic, like supply chains have kind of like crumbled, and like I just feel like there is less assurity in the world, and like things are more like at boiling points, and yeah. Only God knows what the future holds.
Yeah.
And I hope there is not a forced march in my future. That's all I'm gonna say.
What's that quote from Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring? Frodo is like, I wish none of this had happened. And Gandalf's like, so do all who see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. So, not necessarily a Christian quote, but
I'm just impressed that you knew that. Good job.
I mean, I would watch Lord of the Rings, the whole trilogy, like once a month if I could, but maybe not once a month. That might be a lot, but I have watched those movies a lot of times, so I can pull out a lot of quotes.
Nice.
But yeah, that is Tamas's plot. Let's hit on Taniel. So as we mentioned at the beginning, Taniel was in a coma. He woke up. He's kind of in this drug overdose. Well, not overdose, but he's in like this. He's basically just drugged up, and he's trying to forget all the stuff that's happened to him. You'll probably have to help me fill in the gaps as I go through this plot line. But basically,
No problem.
Ricard Tumbler hires Adamat to find Taniel because Ricard wants Taniel. He wants to recruit Taniel essentially to like be his running mate, is what it seems like to me. Ricard's gonna run for prime minister, and then he wants Taniel to like be a second-hand man, to be like, imagine how much like we'd get all the support. Like you're the son of the general Tamas, who was the savior of the city or whatever, and we would win. And Taniel's like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna go to the battle, the war zone, because that's basically. I feel like he has like this kind of weird identity crisis where he feels like the only thing he's good at is killing people, and the first half of the book, at least that I've read, is he's like leaning into that, and that's just what he's gonna do. He's gonna go to the war. He's gonna find some kind of purpose in killing people, killing privileged, doing his best to save the country from being invaded. And so he leaves. What's the city that they're in? The big city, the capital. What's the big city?
Now that you asked me, I'm blanking.
We don't even know the. Oh yeah, it's the city of Adapest.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, we were wrong. We were wrong
for a moment there.
The country is Adro. The city is Adapest.
Yeah.
We were saying Adapest was the country, so we had flipped them.
Oops.
Looking at the map, so retroactive fix for all the previous mentions.
Yeah.
So he leaves the city, Adapest, and he basically travels all the way down to the south.
Pause.
With
We gotta talk real quick about the encounter with the wardens before.
Oh yeah, that's
to the
right.
Front lines.
You go ahead. You just take that.
Oh yeah. So I just love this scene. So and there's also one thing when Taniel was in the Mala Den, and this like, I don't know, I just imagine being like a real sleazy guy is selling him the Mala, and he's like, the witch is with you and something. Right. And then he's like, Taniel's like in his blurry, like drugged mind, he's like trying to explain who Kapol is, and then he's like, yeah, she's a witch. I just thought that was a funny comment. But anyway, after he talks to Ricard Tumbler, he's out in the city streets, and he's with Fell, who is Ricard's assistant that went to the Fontaine's Academy, and Kapol, and he gets no warning, and all of a sudden he's like airborne because like this warden has just like punched him with like this huge warden fist, and he finds himself like in the air, and then like there's another warden, and they're like. And at this point in the book, Taniel has not taken any powder. He's just been on Mala this whole time. And then he gets into this fight with these wardens, and he's like being crushed. And Fell steps up and like slashes a warden with her knife. And this is like her Fontaine Academy like coming to bear. She's like, trained in weapons and stuff. And Kapol has got her needles that are along as someone's forearms, and she's like jabbing at the warden like repeatedly. So Taniel like harangues this guy in the crowd. He's like, "Give me your powder!" And so he throws it at the warden, and he's gonna explode it and detonate like a huge amount of powder, like a whole horn, like right in the warden's face, and nothing happens. And then the warden, like very crazily, like takes the powder horn, and just like starts biting it and chewing it, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, like what is going on right now?"
It is pretty epic.
And then Taniel like gets his like powder charges, and he's just like, "Oh, the powder trance! Like, how could I ever have sacrificed anything for the powder trance? Like, I love the powder trance." And he just goes beast mode on these wardens, and like takes the warden's like rib out of the warden and like stabs him and like kills him. And then the other warden just runs. He's like, "Wardens don't run." They're like, "This one did," because
he wiped out his friend.
Yeah. So here we get to see like the true Black Warden, which we learn throughout like the pages that are coming up that we're pretty sure that Kresimir. So we're gonna talk a little bit about Kresimir. Kresimir, we find out, is with the Kez army, and he's and one of the generals, which we'll talk about in a little bit, says that they saw Kresimir in like a war council between the Kez and the soldiers, and he was wearing a mask, and it only has one eye, and so Kresimir is with the Kez army, and he's kind of responsible for making the Black Wardens, because just as Kresimir has never been with an army before, the Black Wardens have never been with the Kez, and so they've figured out that Kresimir has made wardens out of powder mages, and that's why we have these Black Wardens. And they can use pistols, which normally the wardens don't do that, and they can also like absorb the energy of powder, and so they're like the elite forces of like wardens are terrible enough to deal with, and then these are just like next level wardens. So they're like extra crazy and strong. And we also learn that because Mahali kind of explains that Taniel tried to kill Kresimir, and then Kresimir had like a magical backlash, and it kind of like changed Taniel's inner working, and so he's kind of like God touched, or like a god killer, I think is another term that they use. And so he is like become like, just like the Black Wardens are like the next level wardens, like he is like the next level powder mage. Like he is a step above all other powder mages now. He's got like extra strength, and like Tyler is going to talk about like him on the front lines and stuff, but like he is just like he's no longer just a powder mage, which is like, you know, several standard deviations above like a normal human being. He is now like next level powder mage. So we had to talk about that warden encounter. That was just like really
well. That scene
really
also
cool.
has the important implication of like knowing how strong Taniel is now compared to how he was before. So yes, thank you for giving us that detour, or that return to that scene. So after that he travels down to the front line essentially, and he gets on some kind of a squad, and he's able to he basically just wants to like help the army do as much as they can to keep the Kez at bay. And it seems to me like he's kind of becoming like a one-man army, which makes sense because of how powerful he is. But he's doing all he can to keep the front lines from retreating. But like every time the battle starts, like it seems like only a few minutes later they're sounding the retreat, and that makes Taniel think that the generals don't, like, they basically want to lose. And so he does things to like not make the army retreat. And there's this one scene where he basically like holds the line by himself, and this like one like company or battalion or something stays with him to help him hold the line. Like basically proving that we can hold the line if we really want to. It's just like you general people won't let us, essentially. Yeah, I just thought that it was a cool scene to show like how powerful he is, and I also like that scene because it shows that despite Taniel like resenting his father and really like in his inner monologue, he really does not like his father and all the stuff that he put him through, but he is a lot like his father in terms of his like leadership and how people look up to him and how he does like basically anything that he can to like get the job done. And Tamas is a lot like that. Like he will take risks, he will do what he has to do to get the victory, even if it means like sacrificing people. Like he will do what it takes to win. And like a lot of the like the lower soldiers, like the normal soldiers, like look up to him, but all of the like the higher up people, the generals, kind of like look down on him. And so like seems like there's like this weird divide happening in the army where he's kind of the one that the normal soldiers want to follow, and then the generals don't like that, so they're gonna try and like take him out, essentially. And yeah, I think there's some other scenes with him on the front line with Kapol doing her voodoo thing. There's this one scene with Kapol and she's making some special doll. Can you remember that? Do you remember that scene, or do we not get the payoff for that yet? I know she was making some special thing.
Yeah, I think Taniel notices her making a doll of Fel, and he had seen her making dolls before, and he was like, is she just making dolls for like every single person that we encounter, or is Fel special? And he was like, well, she doesn't have enough room in her backpack for like these dolls to make it for everyone, so he kind of just like writes it off, like, okay, well. But yeah, she is making dolls, and like, you know, we've seen that Julene is, because she's important here in a moment, that she was afraid of Karpol when it was Taniel, super strong powder mage, Bo, super strong privilege, and Karpol, and Julene is a pretty, and so she's like, you know, to the nth degree more powerful than Bo, and she looks at Karpol and she's like, I don't want to mess with this witch.
But there was something else where she would like, was it the Black Wardens? Like she needed Taniel to get like hair or something from one of the Black Wardens to like finish her special doll. And I think that had something to do with like her being able to like control them, or like that was the thing where she could, you know, make it so that she would have power over the Black Wardens, which would be a massive, you know, turning point in the
She
in
does
the battle.
take control of
one.
And that scene was really cool too, where like Kapol is like, she tells the warden, and like it just like wreaks havoc. That might be the part where they hold the line too.
Yeah, she takes complete control over it. Like she tells it where to go. Yes, that's right.
And she's operating it awesome. Like a and it's like blowing up its own troops. It's fighting the other wardens, and she just like sends it deeper and deeper into like the enemy lines, and then like she's like, it's done its work, and then she just like takes her thumb and pushes the head off the doll, and then it just drops dead. But that's after it's like it had taken like bayonets and gunfire, and it was still like trouncing people and killing people, and then she's just like, I'm gonna put an end to this. Just like with her little wax doll. That was also a cool scene. Her magic is just really interesting. It's like a voodoo magic, but she has some like other layers to her. I'm sure we'll learn more about who she is and more of what her magic can do. Gabe has all the answers that we're waiting for. Yeah, I have some of the answers, but her true identity is not even revealed until the second trilogy.
Interesting.
So we go deep into her history in the second trilogy, but we have some really cool scenes with Carpol coming up. So yeah,
in this book or in book 3?
I think there's one. I think there's one in this book that you're just gonna be like, what? Cool. I can't remember. Like, there's this one scene where she just goes nuts, and it's so good. I think it's in this book. I can't remember exactly. I'm pretty sure it's in this book.
Cool. But yeah, so basically where we end with Tamas is
Taniel.
Taniel. Names.
Yeah.
He basically he basically gets in bad with the generals, and there's these guys that come and they try to take him away, and they basically capture him, and that's where we leave him off, and he's going to be basically imprisoned. So we'll have to wait and see if he gets out or what happens, whatever. I'm sure he'll get out or something. But before then, he has a little conversation with Mahali about like, he talks about, like, I thought I killed Kresimir, and Mahali gives him some more details about like it's like you can't really kill him, and I think that's where he gets the details about like why he's more powerful, that you mentioned earlier. That's when he's talking to Mahali, correct?
Yeah.
I love Mahali. I always love. We haven't gotten very much with Mahali this first half of the book, which is too bad. I feel like we got more of him in the first book. Well, I'm sure we'll get more of him towards the end of this book. But yeah, he's always fun. I like his scenes because we always get more, like, little more tidbits on the lore and kind of the god system, because Mahali is Kresimir's brother, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember
the patron saint of Adro, I think.
Right. I'm trying to remember something like about the things about what he said in terms of their relationship. Like, something about like where they could stop him, but they just choose not to. It reminded me a lot of like the Greek gods, how they're all kind of like related, and they have like these interpersonal struggles with each other. And it's like they're like human gods in a way. Like they're gods, but they have like human flaws. This kind of series reminds me of that kind of god structure. Do you remember any other tidbits about that conversation?
That Kresimir had other brothers and sisters that were gods. Yes. And that Kresimir and the others left, and and Mahali, who is Adam Reborn, has kind of just stayed under the radar, and he didn't really expect them to return. Yeah. And he tells Taniel that he would have sensed it if his brother died anywhere in the cosmos, and that we have a confirmation that Kresimir is still alive from Mahali.
Yeah.
Those are only the things that are coming to mind.
Yeah.
Patron saint. I didn't say that earlier.
Yeah, patron saint.
Correctly. Yeah. I didn't say that correctly earlier.
Yeah, I was just trying to read through some of this chapter with Mahali. Yeah. There's some other tidbits in there. But yeah.
He also adds some levity, like when he's talking to Tamas, and he's like, I don't know what to cook.
Yes.
He's like, I only have a 4-course meal.
Oh yeah, we do get a scene with him at the very beginning with him talking to Tamas. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's basically where we leave off our characters. We didn't really talk about Nyla that much. There's not a ton that happens with her. We get a little insight onto how like Vetus is manipulating Jacob. I had a quote in here about basically Vetus is bringing Jacob like gifts and treating him really well, and he's basically trying to win him to his side. And Jacob is calling him Uncle Vetus now, and that just makes Nyla really upset because he's being a very manipulative like father figure to Jacob since his father was killed. And yeah, it was just kind of an interesting scene, and that gives Nyla more of a reason to try to kill her. Yeah, and there's a conversation with her and Faye is basically saying, like, we have to be patient, we have to wait for our time. And then she's like, whenever my time comes, like, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to take him out, essentially.
Yep.
Did you have any things that you enjoyed from Nyla's chapters? Anything specific?
Mostly it's just like learning about the goons and like the relationships that are going on within the household.
Yeah.
We do have a little bit of a look into Vitus's plans. He is planning to woo Wenceslav,
the leader of the Wings of Autumn.
Yep. And he needs Nyla to be his like female relative, and to kind of steer that in the right direction. Her and Nyla and Faye don't get along right at the beginning. At least Nyla didn't trust her, and then they had that moment where Faye kind of tells her thoughts and plans. And yeah, I think that's basically it. It's just like and learning that Lord Vitus is just kind of like, along with that Fontaine Academy, just like he's kind of a machine. And she was like, he drinks a lot, but he never actually gets drunk. And he's just always in control. And I don't think we mentioned this, that Vitus is in the employ of Lord Claremont, who is associated with the trading company, Bordanian Trading Company, something like that. And Adamat at some point was like, I don't even, I know I hate Vitus, but like, I'm looking at this as Lord Claremont is the one holding my family. He's made that association in his mind.
Sure. So
I do want to point that out. And I'd like to revisit Taniel really quick.
Sure.
So first of all, when Taniel is in the army, there are talks of quartermasters, and as I have the pseudonym the Quarantine Quartermaster,
that's
and
right,
I'm trying to become the Quarantine Quartermaster, I think it's just fun to mention that. So the quartermasters are in charge of like the army's like food supplies and stuff, and Taniel is noticing that there is not an ample supply of black powder, and he doesn't know what's going on with that. So he like asks the quartermasters for it, and he's not really seeing that. And then he's not understanding where all the black powder is. And then another key point that we haven't mentioned is he spots Julene. So Julene is
she's the Pretty from the first book.
Yeah, she's the Pretty from the first book. He's looking at the Kez army, and he's like, what are they doing over there? And then he sees this, like, basically like a cross, like being erected, but it's like 7 stories tall. And he's like, there's a naked woman up there, and she has no hands. And then he realizes that it's Julene. And then she, like, starts moving a little bit, and he's like, she's still alive, crucifix on this cross without her hands. And they obviously removed her hands because she's a Pretty, right, and she can't summon the else without the use of her hands. So they've taken her magic away from her. So we know that she is behind or with the Kez army, and she is not on their good side, to say the least. So Taniel has fought his hardest, but he's like being dismissed by General Kett, saying, I've pulled you for special assignments, and I want you to do only this. And Carpole has been conscripted to work as a laundress in the army.
Right. Yeah, they're gonna split him up because it's not proper for him to have
impropriety.
A savage and not have them be married or whatever.
If you're listening to the podcast, Tyler just did air quotes, a savage.
Oh, yeah. That's what everybody calls her, savage, in the book.
Yep.
Even Taniel in his mind, and when his thoughts will say, because he has this thought of like, maybe should I sleep with her? He's like,
oh yeah, he's got this attraction, like going back to the Mala Den. His heart's racing when he sees her, and she like snuggles up on him, and they haven't done anything. There's nothing, but they're definitely familiar, and there definitely seems to be an attraction going on. Yeah,
because she's older than she looks. So, there was one last thing that I had here with Taniel, and it's his conversation with Etan, the guy who, the Black Warden.
I think they pronounce it Etan.
Etan. But basically, when the Black Warden attacks, he gets like basically hit, and he breaks something in his spine, so he can't move, so he's paralyzed essentially. And Etan is like, he's a good guy, and he believes in what Taniel's trying to do. And he basically is asking Taniel that he won't let the let me just find the exact quote. He basically says, "You'll promise me that you'll win this thing," and Taniel's like, "I don't know if I can do that." And he's like, "You have to promise me." And then basically Taniel's like, "No, I'm not going to promise you." And he just calls him a coward essentially, because he says, "If I were dying, you'd promise me, because you wouldn't have to answer to me then. But I'm not dying, and you won't promise." And he says, "Coward." And then Taniel says he turned his face away, and he knew that it was true. So some admission from Taniel himself that he is being a coward in that sense, which is interesting because he's not a coward on the front lines, but he's, I guess, being a coward in terms of like this interpersonal relationship and promising something that he can't necessarily keep.
But I think that's good. I mean, like, yeah, and yeah, it is interesting, but at the same time, like, that is a ridiculous promise to make.
Right.
Like, I'm outnumbered like 10-1. Like, the Kez army is like enormous. Right. I think it's unfair of E10 to be like, General E10 to be like, you need to win this. I don't know that I think that's an unfair.
I don't know if he was asking him to like actually promise to win, or if it was more of a thing like, I want you to give
up, sort of.
I want you to promise me that you'll do everything in your power, regardless of what it costs you, that you'll win and you'll do the right thing, even though all the higher ups are trying to push you down or whatever. Maybe it was more of that kind of a ask and less of a just, I want you to win, because that's like that is like an idle, like it's not something he can actually promise that he'll win the war.
Like that's not in his hands. Like he can do all he can, but
I took it as more of like he's asking him from his personal actions that he would do whatever he can and do the right thing in the end.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I took it.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But I just thought that was an interesting conversation he had. Just showing some more depth to Taniel and like what he thinks about himself. Probably a lot of has to do with like, because he mentions at some point like Tamas would say that, "Where's my useless son?" So I think there's a degree of like Taniel not feeling like he is good enough in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so, self-worth issues. Yeah,
so I think that this conversation as well kind of speaks into that kind of character trait that he has. Just something I picked up on. Any last thoughts on plot or things that happened in the story?
I don't think so. I think we did a good job of wrapping it up. I think I liked following the different storylines. It was easier, to
follow
walk through in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy in this because they're mostly separate storylines, and they don't really. There's not really a lot of cross pollination between all of them. So, let's see, book ending predictions. I guess this will just be me because Gabe knows kind of what happens at the end. Kind of, yeah. He knows where we get, but not how we got there. That's what he said.
Yeah. He
knows the destination, but not the journey. Journey before destination. Stormlight Archive fans, leave a like down below. Yeah, so book predictions. Well, I think that I mentioned a little bit about Adamat. Like, I think that he's going to get at least one of his family members back. I'm kind of thinking that one of them's going to have to die, or he's not going to get all of them back, or there's going to be something where that's not a happy ending for him. For Tamas, yeah, I'm really just interested to see like what his actual plan is and how that's going to work out. I assume that Tamas survives to book 3, so I'm going to assume that he's not going to be dying in this book. But I'm sure there'll be somebody dying in that storyline as well. And then Taniel, yeah, I'm really just interested to see what happens with Capol and her voodoo magic, and just to see what happens with that, and how he's going to get out of
Just wait
this.
till that scene.
Yeah, and how he gets out of the conundrum he's in with the other generals, or how that's going to play out. I don't know. It's kind of hard to predict, but yeah. I think we ended on a good area in the story. Like, there's a lot of like hanging storylines of like, what's going to happen? They're kind of whenever I finished chapter 21, I was like, oh, that is the place I need to stop, because I have lots of like things that are about to happen that I didn't get the ending to. So
yeah,
yes,
it was a good place to stop, and I was very like, I cut it off after chapter 21. I haven't listened to those like 22 through the end of the book in like the 2 years since I've read this book, like for the second or third time. So I have read the third book the least. I think I may have only read it like once or twice,
cool.
and listened to it. So
right.
That's the one I'm least familiar with. But yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, that's gonna do it for this episode. The next episode, we're going to be doing second half of the book, so chapter 22 until the end. I think it's 54 or something like that, whatever the end of the story is. So stay tuned for that. And you can follow us on social media. If you just search Pages of Light, you'll probably find us on all the social platforms. You can check out our website, pagesoflight.com, see what's going on there. Mostly just podcasts right now, nothing else in the works. And if you're listening on Apple Podcast or any of your podcast apps, please leave a review, 5 stars. Tell us why you like the podcast, and if we get a review, we'll read it on the podcast and give you a shout out. And yeah, that's gonna do it. Gabe, any last thoughts before we head out?
I think we're ready for the next recording session, and really soon.
Yeah, there you go. All right, guys, that's going to do it. Remember to keep reading and to share the gospel with somebody this week, and we will see you in the next episode.